While the guerrilla wars raged on Cuba, U.S. administrations kept a proper distance from the rebels, accepting Madrid's position that the conflict was purely an internal Spanish matter. But in New York, a rebel legation called the Cuban Revolutionary Committee spread pro-Cuban propaganda and raised funds from sympathetic Americans for an eventual final revolution. The Cuban revolutionists in the United States were led by a young man who had not fought in the wars and even had appealed to the generals to lay down their arms. José Martí, a writer and orator, had followed the fighting from Spain, Guatemala, and New York, arguing that it would take more than weapons to oust the Spaniards from the island. A well-planned effort supported by the people could succeed, Martí said, but the military elite were not so easily convinced. The generals who had fought so long and gained so little distrusted bold talkers and politicians who had never swung a machete in battle or shot a Spaniard dead. They were convinced that independence could only be achieved by a coup led by professional soldiers. Martí was only 26 when he arrived in New York the first week of 1880 and joined the Cuban Revolutionary Committee. Martí so inspired those around him that he was appointed interim head of the group, but he knew that if his plan for Cuban independence had any hope of succeeding, he had to enlist the old guardians of the 10 Years' War. Martí's initial efforts to persuade the two most respected generals, Máximo Gómez and Antonio Maceo, were ignored. Gómez, living in his native Dominican Republic, visited Martí in New York in 1884 to discuss a new revolution. But the warrior's conclusion was that Martí was a big talker who feared an actual war for independence in which politicians would be eclipsed by military men. Maceo, the bronze titan who controlled the black Mambises that totaled nearly half the rebels, found Martí to be unlikable and unreliable. Not surprisingly, Martí did not trust the two generals, suspecting that Gómez and Maceo desired to set themselves up as military dictators after independence was achieved. The difference between Martí and the generals was more than age. Martí was an idealist who looked at class differences and the racial animosity dividing the Cubans of the immigration, and saw a reflection of all that was wrong with Spanish rule in Cuba. The ultimate goal of the revolution was to end such things on the island. The first step must be to end them among the émigrés who constituted 126 Cuban clubs in 18 cities. Cubans needed something more to unify them than hatred of Spain. To Martí, the words and ideas that would accomplish that were far more important than the guns and ammunition Gómez sought.